To keep her family afloat, Kulsum once again had to climb the perilous cliffs to gather wild thyme. This morning, Kulsum was busy washing dishes. Just then, Bazgasht began to lay out the day's task, telling Kulsum to go back to the mountains to pick thyme. He said the family's solar power device was broken, and needed to be taken for repairs, but he didn't have any money on hand and would have to borrow it. Kulsum replied with a sense of helplessness, saying that there weren't many good plants left to gather on the mountain now. She knew that the mountain wilds were gradually drying up this season, with few plants and flowers remaining. But Bazgasht's tone was firm. There are still some, they're just harder to find. You have to be careful. Kulsum finally couldn't hold back and asked, with a hint of accusation in her voice, "You sold all that honey, where's the money? Where did the money from the honey go? You say you have to borrow money, don't lie to me." Bazgasht frowned. "Do you have any idea how high your expenses are?" Kulsum retorted, "There are only a few of us, how could we have so many expenses?" And so it went, one demanding the truth, the other using the pressure of reality as a shield. Kulsum slung the cloth bag over her shoulder, ready to leave, but her child began to cry, not wanting his mother to go. Kulsum comforted the child, telling him to stay with his grandmother at home, and that she would bring back some wild berries for him. Carrying the cloth bag, Kulsum set off on the rugged mountain path. She needed to get to the summit first to find the wild thyme that grew at high altitudes. Because she had already been to the mountains to gather it many times before, the areas were nearly picked clean. This time, she had to go to a different, more distant place, a mountain forest rarely visited by people. Perhaps only there could she still find thyme that hadn't been picked. Now, Kulsum stood before a nearly vertical rock face that she needed to climb. In the cracks of the rock wall grew some hardy small grasses and low-lying plants, their roots anchored among the stones, providing Kulsum with handholds and footholds. For an ordinary person, climbing such a rock wall would be an almost impossible task. A towering stone wall, with no safety ropes and no protective gear whatsoever, one slip could mean falling into the deep valley below, with unimaginable consequences. But Kulsum had no choice, she had to face this danger time and time again. For the sake of her family's livelihood, to allow them to get by, or perhaps for the reason of paying off debts that Bazgasht spoke of, she could only force herself to climb onward. Perhaps those excuses weren't entirely true, but under the weight of reality, even if Kulsum had her doubts, she could only choose to complete the task. With great effort, she finally scrambled up the steep rock face. The wind howled at the summit, but she didn't have time to rest, immediately searching along the cliff's edge. She peered over and spotted thyme on the precipice ahead, but she didn't know if there was a path to get down. So, Kulsum could only go and look. In a place like this, paths never truly existed. If a person wanted to get across, the only way was to painstakingly climb. Gathering thyme has never been an easy task. This plant, thyme, is tenacious and resilient, preferring to take root in the rock crevices at high altitudes, growing against wind, snow, and the scorching sun. Because of this, it often appears in the most dangerous and inaccessible places. Kulsum finally made the difficult climb to the edge of this cliff, and began to pick the few sprigs of thyme there. Kulsum seemed anxious now. She knew that if she couldn't collect a full bag of thyme, she wouldn't be able to complete her task when she returned. Bazgasht would surely complain, and might even take his anger out on her. But it was currently the end of summer, and at this time of year, thyme in the mountains is very scarce. To gather a full bag now was an almost impossible demand. Carrying her bag, she moved slowly along the precipice, picking a plant whenever she spotted one. No matter what, she had to find a way to fill the bag. "This one is very small, but I have to pick it," she muttered. The thyme plants were exceptionally sparse on the summit. For every sprig Coulson picked, she had to walk a considerable distance. Thyme generally grows most vigorously in late spring and early summer. By mid-August, not many plants have survived in the rock crevices. During the summer, the temperature at the summit is about 15 to 20 degrees Celsius during the day, and can drop to around 5 degrees Celsius at night. This temperature is a very suitable environment for thyme. As summer nears its end, the temperature in high-altitude areas drops significantly. While the daytime might still be in the teens, the nights are often near freezing or even lower. The sudden change in climate slows down the growth of thyme. New tender leaves do not grow easily, and the once lush plants gradually wither, naturally leading to a smaller harvestable quantity. Coulson walked step by step along the mountain ridge. Once she finished picking in one area, she came over to this side to continue. After working for a long while, she was still far from her goal of filling the bag. Coulson once again walked to the edge of the cliff. The wind howled in her ears, and below her feet was a bottomless valley. Every step was like walking on thin ice, but for the sake of her family's debts and livelihood, she had to approach the danger again and again. Coulson continued along the cliff's edge, but the path ahead disappeared. A steep rock wall prevented her from moving forward, so she could only choose to turn back and find a new route. The paths in the mountains were not made for people. She could only rely on her experience and courage to try again and again. Coulson carefully maneuvered downwards, descending towards the lower part of the cliff. On this rock face, she found a resilient wild shrub, its green leaves dotted with small, bright red berries. She picked some to taste. The berries were already ripe, their color having turned from green to red. She knew that although these wild fruits were rather sour and astringent, they were a rare source of energy in the mountains. Eating some could both quench her thirst, and slightly replenish the energy she had expended while climbing. Coulson ate the small handful of berries she had picked, and then continued down the cliff. To collect a sufficient amount, she had to keep descending, even into more treacherous areas. Coulson followed the cliff's edge and arrived here. She was startled to see a tiger's cave before her. After a quick glance, she continued on. After a few more steps, the path was cut off entirely. Coulson was now in a dilemma, stuck on the cliff face with no way up or down. In such a high mountain environment, every climb is a gamble with life. The wind whistles past, and any misstep could lead to irreversible and dire consequences. Fortunately, she made it safely up and sat down to rest on a relatively safe cliff edge, drinking some water to regain some strength. After a short break, Kulsum had to return the way she came. However, coming down is easy, while going up is hard. Every inch of upward movement is a struggle against gravity and the limits of her stamina. But for that one bag of thyme, to sustain her family, she still had to find a sliver of a way out in this desperate situation. This is the cruel reality Kulsum faces day after day. In these desolate mountains, although the lives of nomadic women are very hard, few have to face such a perilous environment almost every day like Kulsum does. Kulsum's life represents the plight of a very small minority of women, who are forced to bear hardships and dangers beyond the norm, and all of this often goes unnoticed. After a difficult climb, Kulsum finally reached the summit. She sat on the ridge to rest for a moment. Soon, Kulsum's brow gradually furrowed. She muttered that she had already searched this entire mountain forest, walking a long way along the ridge, but the time she had collected was still negligible. After resting for a moment, she casually picked a few more thyme stems that had already withered, murmuring, "The dried ones are not very useful, but even if their value was limited, it was better than nothing." After nearly a full day of climbing and searching, Kulsum now had to go down the mountain. Along the way, she also collected some scattered dry firewood and carried it on her shoulder. Seeing his mother return, the child quickly ran over to her. At this moment, even though she hadn't gathered much thyme, seeing her child gave her a touch of warmth and a reason to persevere. Basgasht had already returned from the city. Kulsum put down the firewood and told her that she had searched all over the mountain forests, crossing one cliff after another, but the thyme had long since withered. Most of it was dried up, and there was very little left to pick. Upon hearing this, Basgasht flew into a rage, blaming Kulsum for gathering too little. Although Kulsum explained over and over that she had scoured the forests and cliffs and still couldn't find much, Basgasht refused to listen, throwing the cloth bag on the ground. In Basgasht's eyes, what mattered most was not Kulsum's hardship and danger, but the debt hanging over their heads. The argument continued. At this point, Basgasht told Kulsum to hurry up and boil water for tea, and then to make dinner. Basgasht grew more and more agitated, complaining that the family's solar power inverter was broken, but she had gone everywhere to borrow money, and couldn't raise the funds for the repair. Basgasht placed all her hopes on Kulsum, saying they needed at least 20 to 30 kilograms of thyme to exchange for enough money. At that moment, Kulsum's heart felt as if it were being crushed by a giant stone. As she was busy starting a fire to boil water, she muttered, "Oh God, what should I do?" On one side was the suffocating debt, and on the other was her husband still in prison, with an elderly and frail patient at home waiting for her care. Just as Kulsum served the tea, Basgasht immediately told her to go feed water to the bees. The housework was endless. Kulsum wanted to finish her tea first, but she wasn't allowed. She found 2 kettles, filled them with water, and carried them towards the beehives on the mountain. Like many nomadic families, Basgasht also kept a colony of bees. It was now autumn, and the weather was gradually cooling. The bees were much less active than in the height of summer. In theory, they would rely on their stored honey to get through the winter, and before the cold truly set in, they needed to replenish their water.